Hola, I'm Jorge Ramos.
And I'm Paola Ramos.
And this is The Moment. Hay que decirlo desde el principio, Paola. Let me just say right away, this episode is going to feel and sound very different because we go from English to Spanish to Spanglish and back to English, and we do that a lot, but there's a reason for it.
We do it a lot. We mostly end up speaking in Spanish. Part of the reason why is because we're talking to two great Mexican actors, Fernanda Castillo and Alfonso Herrera, who have these key roles in Amazon Prime's upcoming series, The House of Spirits, which is, of course, that based on Isabel Allende's novel, La Casa de los Espíritus, published in 1982.
So here's what's different, Paola. You will notice that you and I, we really try to bring back the conversation in English, but then it is honestly impossible when the book was written in Spanish. The series is in Spanish, and for Alfonso, Fernanda, and I, Spanish is our first language.
It's also interesting, Dad, because from what we learned in the conversation, Isabel Allende also allegedly told the actors that she thought that the only way to really do La Casa de los Espíritus justice on the screen is in Spanish. No? So we're going to get into all of that and much more with Alfonso and Fernanda. You may actually remember Alfonso from the TV series Rebelde. He's also part of Netflix Ozark. And in this role, he steps into the character of Esteban Trueba, of course, somebody that embodies machismo, no, in the classism of the 20th century. Then there's Fernanda, another incredible actress. You've seen her on your screen for sure. Most likely in her playing El Señor de los Cielos. In this series, she plays Férula Trueba, and of course, someone that embodies oppression, repression, and also this deep longing for love, Dad.
So you can remember, you can watch this episode with subtitles in our YouTube channel. But anyway, our bilingual conversation with Fernanda Castillo and Alfonso Herrera when we come back. Fernanda y Alfonso, a los dos, gracias por estar aquí. Thank you so much for doing this with us, especially in this Spanglish, English, in Spanish conversation.
That's how we do it.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys. It's
Thank
a pleasure.
you.
All right, so let me just begin with that, Fernanda and Alfonso. The fact that the four of us speak Spanish and that we're doing this interview in English with a lot of accent says a lot about the universal value of the series and the book, The House of the Spirits. It was published more than 40 years ago. There was a film in 1993. So Fernanda, why do you think it is important that this adaptation in Amazon Prime Video is being seen today? Why does it resonate right now?
Because it talks about many things that are like happening right now. First, it was written in Spanish. So now is the first time that it's done in Spanish. And we did it in Chile, where right. The author imagined it. She didn't write it there because she wrote it in Venezuela. But like everything was meant to be like this. And that's the words of Isabel. She said, like, esta serie es como debió ser, ¿no? Desde el principio. So it's very important for us to be like part of this team that is like doing this the right way.
Alfonso, how do you see it? Why does it resonate in 2026? We were checking before the interview, and it was written in 1982, about the time when both of you were born. So why does it matter?
Thank you for that. Thank you for making me feel a little bit younger.
I still wasn't born.
I really appreciate that.
I'm the oldest of all, so don't worry.
I mean, we're talking about a novel that was written a couple of decades ago. 70 million copies sold all over the world, translated into 40 different languages, and at the same time, it talks about who we are as Latin Americans, who we are, the vicious, the virtues, the wounds, the scars that we carry. And in a certain way, when we talk about House of Spirits, we talk about the region, and in a very peculiar way, those things that occurred in a very painful way occurred in a very similar and a very specific period of time, not just in Chile, but also in Argentina, also in Brazil. And as Mario Vargas Llosa would say, in Mexico, we had something in a certain way as a perfect dictatorship because of a political party that stayed there for 80 plus years. So also, this is very powerful, and I echo what Fernanda just said. This was meant to be in Spanish. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was doing a couple of years ago a project in Atlanta. We were all in COVID period, in pandemic, and I was in therapy with in a very potent session, and all of a sudden the therapist said, "Okay, stop. What you just said, you have to say that in Spanish." And I asked her why, and she said, "Because if you say it in your mother tongue, it resonates in a much deeper way, and it creates a deeper echo." And I think this is the case of House of Spirits. It creates a deeper echo when if you talk about the show that right now it's done in Chile in Spanish, it's more powerful, it's more potent, and the DNA of the project itself, it's the right way.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think even my dad and I talk about that all the time. The difference between doing some interviews in English versus Spanish, what feels more true to oneself, to one's character. But I am curious about the fact that you're obviously both Mexican actors within a very distinctly Chilean story. I think if you look at the show, se escuchan acentos chilenos, se escuchan acentos mexicanos, there's neutral Spanish. So I'm curious about what it was like for you both as Mexicans to be in this Chilean story.
Yo creo que es que lo abordamos como latinoamericanos. El hecho de estar en un lugar donde sí era Chile, pero estábamos actores y creativos de diferentes lugares de Iberoamérica realmente. Y todos con una conciencia muy clara de estamos contando esta historia porque es la historia de todos, porque no se trata de la historia de Chile y no se trata de... Y claro, todos nos tuvimos que acoplar a buscar un acento que a todos nos resonara, porque es verdad que cuando uno habla, el idioma en el que estás hablando te resuena en las entrañas y dice quién eres de alguna manera, ¿no? La manera de gestualizar, de colocar la voz y de colocar, habla desde los adentros también. Entonces, parte de abordar esto desde un lugar como una sensación latinoamericana, desde una sensación de todos estamos en equipo para hablar de nuestra memoria colectiva, de mirar hacia atrás para celebrar quiénes somos, pero teniendo conciencia de quiénes hemos sido como una Latinoamérica. Entonces, eso hizo que aunque viniéramos de diferentes lugares, que aunque tuviéramos diferentes edades, de aunque ninguno probablemente hubiera vivido una dictadura ya en estos tiempos, pudiéramos entender perfecto que tenemos, como dice Alfonso, como dolores parecidos y ganas de emprender hacia adelante parecidas también, y que eso nos hace siempre hablar un idioma común, ¿no? Y se volvió es un acento común, pero una sensación común y un corazón común para toda la manera de contar la historia, ¿no?
Yeah. And maybe I can very quickly just translate it to our listeners, those who may not be speaking Spanish primarily, but essentially what Fernanda is saying, and I think this is so important, Dad, right? Which is coming into these spaces not necessarily as Mexican actors, but as Latino-American actors. And within that, to try and find sort of the collective memory of a region, of a continent that has gone through many similar things. But I think that's very powerful, the idea of coming in as Latinoamericanos y not just as Mexicans. Go ahead, Dad.
Alfonso, how do you see it? How did you manage the different accents?
Well, one time it was tough because the Chilean accent is actually very tough. And once I heard that a dialect coach told me that accents, you need different types of things to create a very specific accent. Altitude, the amount of oxygen that a person has in the place where they live, the space where people live, and that creates a very specific tone. And at the beginning of the story, Isabel Allende says this happens in a remote place of a South American country. So it doesn't talks about Chile because of the context that they were living at that time. But no hay casualidades. No hay casualidades. Creo que hay causalidades que haya ocurrido de una manera como tan particular. Hablar nowadays, to talk about this story as Latin Americans, and also it talks about so many relevant things, like the huge polarization that we're living nowadays, not just in the region, not just in Latin America, I mean, but also in the whole world. I think that we've lost the compass between lefts and rights, but we should look what happens up and down in a more simple way, not intellectualizing that much. And I think that's also very, very powerful.
Fernanda, te quería preguntar sobre La Casa de los Espíritus. For this interview, we watched the first 3 episodes, and I reread part of the book. The series is beautifully done. It's just so beautiful. But then, when I read the book many years ago, the first time, my idea of the house of spirits, was completely different. For me, my house, Fernanda, was scarier, darker. Me asustaba mucho más. Y la casa que yo vi fue un poquito distinta. So, how do you deal with the expectations of the audience that they're going to see something and then suddenly your house is different than mine, Fernanda?
It's very difficult to compete, like, to your own house, your own idea of desire, of passion, of light, of magic, whatever you imagine in your own story when you read it, will have to do with what you connect with and what it resonates with you. So we were not trying to compete with it. We're trying like to do a different thing, like something that resonates with all of us and present it. It will never be as powerful as when you read it.
As a literal, universe of,
But I think, o sea, creo que es necesario a veces poderlo ver. A mí también me sucedió que había cosas que veía de una manera diferente, pero creo que están en esta presentación están pensadas de una manera mucho más como humana, cercana y también cercana a unas nuevas audiencias que puedan leerlo desde otro lugar, ¿no? Simplemente yo hago un personaje que podría ser mucho más oscuro y me acuerdo mucho de los directores diciendo, necesitamos en lugar de buscar la oscuridad en este personaje, hacerla más humana viendo su luz también, porque todos somos eso al final, ¿no? Todos somos luz y sombra, y eso es lo interesante, es una nueva manera de descubrirla que nunca va a competir al final con lo que le resuena a uno, y creo que esa es la magia de poder ver en algo audiovisual de algo que lees, ¿no? Antes.
Tu férula es un personaje muy complejo. Tienes razón, Fernanda, porque no es solo este personaje que asusta, sino que tiene ese lado tan humano de su cercanía con Clara. So Alfonso, let me ask you about your house. How did you imagine that house? How did you work with it?
Well, when I talk about my house, I have to talk about Esteban Trueba and trying to find, like, the first glimpse or like the first view could be he's a total villain and that's it. But in order to create a more complex character, you need to step maybe 2 steps aside and try to search for that vulnerability of him, the dark side and the light part, which is a very complicated task to do specifically in that character. But it's trying not to judge the character itself, because he represents the injustice in Latin American governments. He represents inequality. He represents the how he loves, but all the things that he loves, he needs to possess, which in a certain way represents also how Latin American governments operate. And I'm going to go a little bit into Spanish. Creo que Esteban representa, es que puede ser visto como un monstruo, pero al mismo tiempo también es un padre de familia que tiene muchos dolores, que tuvo una madre que lo trituró psicológicamente, que tuvo una ausencia paterna total, que al final de cuentas en América Latina también sufrimos de una orfandad generacional. Y bien lo decía Octavio Paz, de alguna forma todos somos un poco huérfanos en México. Y pues bueno, esa orfandad también ocurre en América Latina porque compartimos también la conquista. Y la conquista es este mestizaje en el que el español se fue y al final de cuentas la madre quedó con sus hijos, con sus hijas, y se creó un sistema de castas y un sistema de cómo nos organizamos, cómo operamos, cómo nos correlacionamos. Y eso es algo que ocurre solamente en América Latina. Y pues bueno, Esteban Trueba es un poco esa mano opresora, ese padre que de alguna manera está, pero al mismo tiempo no está. Y bueno, esa mirada me pareció interesante explorar. Ahora, también debo decirte que mi Casa de los Espíritus era un poco más oscura, porque la Casa de los Trueba es una causa mucho más oscura que los del Valle, ¿no? Los del Valle es... pues, ¿cómo podríamos decir? ¿Cómo podríamos definir a los del Valle? Son mucho más alegres, yo creo que igual y podría ser como esta parte cuando Isabel Allende escribió la novela en Venezuela en el exilio, que ella hablaba mucho de la luminosidad, de la luz, y la Casa de los Trueba, pues es este contrapunto, ¿no? Un poco más oscuro, más doloroso, ¿no?
Sí, Isabel Allende me contaba que basó la casa la casa de su abuelo, pero que la casa en la que ustedes viven, en la que ustedes vivieron como personajes, era muchísimo más grande. Pero en fin, Paola.
No, de hecho, I wanted to stay on your characters, on Esteban and Férula. I think, Alfonso, you've done a very beautiful job at describing how you got to know Esteban, no, and it seems like it was kind of this painful journey to get to him specifically. But I'm curious for both of you, and I'll start with you, Alfonso, about your journey to this role. No, like taking us all the way back to when we all knew you, no, as Miguel from Rebelde, taking us back to Javi from Netflix Ozark. Do you feel like those roles sort of helped inform who Esteban is and just kind of your role as an actor?
I think in a certain way, all your past makes you be the person who you are right now. So all those collective experiences transform you in what you are right now. And talking about the Esteban journey, it was a very intense journey because I've never done something like this in my life, like to portray someone that it's in his late 20s, all the way to his death. So there was a journey of prosthetics and a corporality, a work in terms of applying the exact amount of energy to the character. And because in these type of projects, we do not shoot in a chronological way. So trying not to be lost in the 40s and then the day after we were going to shoot in the 60s and try to apply the specific amount of energy plus the Chilean accent. Wow, it was como diríamos en español, estábamos malabareando como 5 o 6 bolas a la vez.
Yeah, you were juggling a lot.
Yeah, I was juggling a lot with many things at the same time, but it was tough, but at the same time, this tough role, it's a luxury. It's a luxury to have been in this project and with this iconic character of such an iconic piece of literature from Latin American literature.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar for you, Fernanda. No, we all know you similarly as Mónica Robles, of course, from El Señor de los Cielos. Obviously, it's a very different character from Férula. As Mónica, it's almost this like villain type character, and then in Férula, you're so restrained. No, you're so sort of like emotionally inward, very strict, fría. What was that shift like for you as a character?
Creo que nunca podría haber llegado al nivel de vulnerabilidad con el que yo entré a Férula y con el nivel de fragilidad que necesita el personaje para estar descubriendo por primera vez los estímulos como el que te abracen por primera vez, el que te toquen, el que te miren. Es un personaje que no ha sido mirada nunca y que no existe para su familia. y que es mirada por primera vez por otra mujer. Entonces, es una mujer que está descubriéndose a sí misma a través de los ojos de otra mujer. Nunca hubiera podido entrar con esa vulnerabilidad si no hubiera antes explorado el poder que tenemos también. He hecho una carrera a base de tener una comunicación como muy potente con las mujeres y de que las mujeres sientan que mis personajes les habla al poder de ellas mismas, ¿no? Al poder que ellas mismas pueden tener si se lo permiten. Y ha sido mucho de la comunicación que yo he tenido a lo largo de mi carrera con mis personajes. Entonces, pensar que a través de este personaje también le estoy hablando a las luchas de las mujeres, ¿no? Y que todas hacemos este viaje en el que no hay manera de sentirnos vulnerables si no nos sentimos también poderosas, y que es un círculo que no se acaba y que no nos vuelve ni más débiles ni teniendo más el control porque seamos una u otra. Entonces me encanta pensar que eso lo complementa, como nos complementa a todas, además de que pienso que es una serie que habla de cosas que siento que estas generaciones damos muy por hecho, ¿no? El hecho de que podemos hoy votar, de que podemos decidir sobre nuestro cuerpo, de que yo puedo decidir cómo estar vestida, que cada quien puede decidir a lo que se dedica, ¿no? Y pensar que hace muy pocos años las mujeres, y sucede en la serie, ¿no? Es un portarretrato muy claro de que hace muy pocos años las mujeres no podían decidir eso. Este personaje en especial es un personaje que no ha podido decidir nada en su vida. Entonces, esta serie habla también de nuestras luchas como mujeres, ¿no? Y de nuestros vínculos entre mujeres que nos hacen rescatarnos y sanarnos de alguna manera, ¿no?
Bueno, en ese sentido, dale, papá. No, well, I wanted to ask them precisely about that. No, we know that both of you have had very strong relationships with your own mothers. No, and so I'm curious, just what it meant like and felt like for both of you, understanding your own family history, to be part of a movie that grounds women, ¿no? In the way that it does. O sea, personalmente, ¿cómo fue eso para ustedes, dadas las relaciones que tienen con sus mamás?
Yo recuerdo a mi madre. Yo vivo en Ciudad de México, pero cuando era más pequeño yo vivía en Guadalajara. Y me acuerdo vivir con mi hermano pequeño y mi madre, y ella viviendo en un tercer piso sin elevador. Digo, vivíamos en un departamento de clase media. Y pues yo daba por sentado que cuando yo tenía 4 años, mi madre cargaba a mi hermano y me cargaba a mí, y de repente, de manera mágica, las bolsas de comida también llegaban al departamento. Y años después yo le dije a mi madre, mamá, ¿cómo le hacías para llevarme a mí, para llevar a mi hermano, para llevar las bolsas de comida en un tercer piso donde no había elevador? Y me decía, pues era mamá. Y a veces las mamás...
Wow, qué respuesta tan buena.
Y a veces las madres tienen superpoderes y bueno, me conmueve mucho esto porque
Claro.
las madres tienen un superpoder y es tienen el superpoder de equilibrarlo todo, de hacer que todo sane, de hacer que las cosas sean más llevaderas, de educar, fue algo, fue algo muy lindo. Y curiosamente mi madre nunca ha ido a una premiere, nunca ha ido a un set, nunca, porque siempre me dice, no, Alfonso, tú haz tu trabajo, tú haz lo que tengas que hacer, tú trata de hacerlo lo mejor posible, yo no quiero incomodar. Y curiosamente, por primera vez en Guadalajara va a ir a ver Casa de los Espíritus, porque sé lo que significa. Y quiero compartir esa alfombra con ella. Quiero compartir esa alfombra con ella porque, como lo decía muy atinadamente Fernanda, esta historia habla de sanar, de una sanación generacional. Y eso, y muchísimas gracias por esta pregunta. La agradezco enormemente.
Fernanda, what do you feel when you think of your mom?
Yo tengo una mamá que es mi heroína. Cuando yo era chica era mi heroína porque la veía en un altar inalcanzable. Y conforme han pasado los años, y me convertí en mamá. Fui viéndola más heroína todavía porque bajó de ese altar inalcanzable y nos pusimos a la par. Y vi lo complejo de la maternidad, donde uno quiere darles todo, pero quiere enseñarles todo, pero quiere privarlos de todo daño, pero quiere también que sean personas de bien, pero también darles libertad, y donde no hay nada que hagas, nunca harás lo suficiente como para no equivocarte, ¿no? Siempre estarás en ese lugar donde te vas a equivocar. Mi mamá es una mujer que me enseñó a revolucionar. Es una mujer que tiene un grado de empatía que la sobrepasa, pero también es una revolucionaria de alma, ¿no? Las grandes batallas que yo hoy peleo como ser humano, ¿no? Y como mujer, que además veo que ambos mis hermanos son peleadores sociales y les importa y usan su voz y sus trincheras para hablar de las cosas que son importantes. Eso es un legado de mi mamá. Y entonces hablar de una serie que habla de eso, de la importancia de los legados, y que a pesar de las heridas que no sanaron, que no se hablaron, siempre tenemos la oportunidad de volver ahí y celebrar que estamos vivos, que estamos juntos y que tenemos la oportunidad de hacer las cosas diferente. Me emociona mucho. Entonces, y creo que eso es un legado de mi mamá, que me enseñó a pelear, ¿no? Que no solamente me enseñó a mirar a otros, sino que me enseñó a pelear, y que creo que eso es de las cosas más hermosas que tengo.
So let me ask you, do you think this series and this book is a feminist book and a feminist series? For this podcast, we spoke with Isabel Allende a few months ago. And as you know, she was a feminist before there was a feminist movement in Latin America.
When I started with the House of the Spirits and it became a sudden success in Europe, women had been writing in Latin America for centuries, but there was not one name in the boom of Latin American literature. The men occupied all the space.
So women in the series, of course, you know everything. They demand the right to vote. They complain about sexual abuse. They create schools, as you said, Fernanda. They really drive the story. Even Fernanda dice, los hombres son todos iguales. I wonder if the message is already having an impact in your industry and in Latin America. Alfonso. Bueno, dale como quieras.
Por favor, Fernanda.
No, yo creo que sin duda la serie tiene un legado femenino importante. Son dos mujeres las que un día vieron este texto y dijeron, tenemos que levantar este proyecto. Fernando Rejola y Francisca Alegría, y contactaron a Isabel, y contactaron a Eva Longoria, y levantaron este proyecto. Y es en esa necesidad de hablar de historias de mujeres, de honrar las historias de mujeres, pero además, de la misma manera, la mujer que es violentada como la que es la protagonista de la historia luminosa, había una idea de hablar, de hacer tribus femeninas y de defender, pero no femeninas excluyendo a los hombres, femeninas en el sentido más puro de la palabra, de femeninas con este instinto femenino que tenemos todos, por esta sensibilidad que podemos tener todos, la parte femenina como de humanos que podemos tener todos, y desde ahí parte la historia. Y así fue construida, lo hablábamos hace un rato, y decíamos, había una sororidad en el set, que éramos mujeres de diferentes nacionalidades, de diferentes edades, veníamos de diferentes contextos, y había una sensación de generosidad y de sororidad en el espacio, que no excluía a los hombres para nada, pero que era parte de, estamos contando esta historia, tiene que ser el feeling a lo largo de toda la filmación, y eso era lo que existía, de apertura a la creatividad de los otros, de generosidad con el talento de los otros, con el dolor de los otros, con la visión de los otros. Entonces sí creo que viene de esto antiguo femenino de escuchar. Las mujeres eran las que escuchaban, las que cuidaban, las caregivers, ¿no? Hasta el último día de sus vidas. Entonces sí tiene esa parte femenina. Bueno, al menos yo la sentí así y creo que eso es lo que la hace tan cercana y la hace tan universal también, y que todos podemos conectarnos con ella, hombres o mujeres, porque no se trata nada más de una historia de mujeres, ¿no?
Hago eco de lo que dice Fernanda y creo que también para contar una historia así debe de existir una congruencia. Y era muy bello ver un set lleno de mujeres frente a las cámaras, pero también era un set muy bello de ver muchas mujeres atrás de cámaras.
Atrás, claro.
Ver focus pullers, ver scripts, ver eléctricas, ver grips, ver era un set de mujeres. Entonces, a mí me pareció interesante y muy congruente que una historia de estas características no solamente hablara de la potencia de las mujeres en una novela, sino que el andamiaje que pudiera sostener y que pudiera construir el esqueleto de esta historia también fueran mujeres atrás de las cámaras y las showrunners, las directoras. Entonces, pues es algo que yo celebro. Y también aplaudir la visión de Javiera Balmaceda, quien tuvo la visión para poder crear esta historia y para poderla, para que se pueda transmitir por Prime Video.
Paola.
De hecho, hablamos mucho sobre la importancia de la representación, ¿no? We talk so much time about the importance of women representation, also Latino representation in front and behind the camera. And I think to your point, and you already mentioned it, this is obviously produced by Eva Longoria. And you mentioned the showrunners, Alfonso. Tienen a Francisca Alegría, Fernanda Urrejola, y también tienen, of course, a Andrés Wood. That's something that we strive for in the United States all the time. You know, that type of Latino representation. And so I'm curious what it feels like for you as actors to be in a production that is led, directed, and acted by Latinos. Like, what does that feel like?
It is incredible also to understand and to feel that this project has the power and the potency to go beyond the region, to probably to be seen in Europe, to be seen in Asia. I mean, when you talk about Isabel Allende, it's a bestseller in Germany. It was a bestseller in Japan. Not so long ago, I was in Switzerland because I went for the Euros Women Cup. And all the best, like Isabel Allende was in the #1 bestsellers from her previous book. And it's incredible also to push other audiences to read subtitles. It's incredible. Yeah. It's also incredible. And also,
well, you know, they always say that people don't want to do that, but I think that's all a myth. I mean, I think there's a myth there that, you know, Americans don't want Latino films or don't want Latino representation, when in fact, it's completely the opposite. And I think you're an example of that.
Completely. And I think that it's a privilege also to be part of this project. I don't know, Fernanda, would you like to add something?
Yo creo que siempre, que todos queremos historias que nos representen, seamos de donde seamos. Okay. Entonces, el hecho de que existan historias que nos hagan sentir que somos uno, van a ser aceptadas siempre. Y qué gran momento es este, qué necesario es para no hacia afuera ser aceptados, sino hacia nosotros, mirarnos y muy orgullosamente decir, estas son nuestras historias. Este es el español, este es nuestro idioma. Es una celebración de esto. Esta historia es una celebración de esto, de que existimos y de que merecemos tener un lugar y que merecemos sentirnos orgullosos de él. Entonces creo que parte de esto es, contar esta historia tiene que ver con eso, con qué bueno que se está haciendo en español, qué bueno que se está haciendo, que se filmó en Latinoamérica, qué bueno que se está haciendo con actores iberoamericanos, para decir qué orgullosos estamos de ser quienes somos, ¿no?
We have one final question. So let me just finish with this. Isabel, in this podcast, explained how she talks to those who have passed, those who have died, especially in difficult moments like the ones she has lived.
And when I have decided that I have a group of spirits that help me. This is all in my head. I know.
Casa de los Espíritus.
Mi casa de los, my house of the spirits.
So, do you personally, Alfonso and Fernanda, do you have your own spirits that you talk to? And do you have these cuadernos para anotar la vida, your own diaries? Careful with the answers. Que si hablan con los muertos, pues.
Sí.
I don't even know what you would answer, Dad.
Bueno, I'll go first. I think that when we talk about our culture, our roots, at the end of October and at the beginning of November, we all celebrate in a very ludic and in a very peculiar way in Mexico the people that passed away. And I do that. And my children, they have this interesting and very joyful conception of this period of time, because in Mexico, is it a beginning? Is it an end? What is that? So,
Right.
So I can tell that as a Mexican, I live it, and as Mexicans, we all share that. Also, I was giving a couple of an explanation about the cell phone. Like, we have like this piece, like this mobile device that all of a sudden with invisible technology, a message appears and you can be connected with a person in Germany. And I do think that there are things that are invisible to the human eye that coexist between us. And we just need to have the right consciousness and to tune in. I'm not talking about magical experience, but just to tune in, and certain things appear, like certain messages appear, and we just need to pay attention. That's it. I don't know if it makes sense. I hope.
It does.
I think my cell phone is my cuaderno de anotar la vida.
Así.
No, la verdad es que después de ver la serie, lamenté mucho no haberlo hecho en la vida, no tener estos diarios. Tengo alguno de cuando era chica, que además me recuerda muchas cosas de quién soy, de quién imaginaba ser y de las cosas que he logrado ser y que soñaba y que he logrado alcanzar. Pero lamentaba mucho que no tengamos eso, ¿no? Que no sigamos escribiendo nuestra vida pensando en que mañana alguien lo leerá y le hará algún sentido. Muy recientemente mi papá pasó a otro plano y me ha sucedido porque probablemente es la primera pérdida muy cercana que tengo en la que de repente hablo con él y me conecto con pensar, tal vez no estás tan lejos como siento, tal vez estás aquí, tal vez hay cosas que me faltaron decir y en esa carencia de cuerpo físico hay mensajes que te puedo mandar de alguna manera si los digo en alto, ¿no? Entonces creo en esa mística de decir todos tenemos esas fuerzas de la naturaleza que son también los que han estado detrás de nosotros, que nos empujan hacia adelante y que quiero que empujen a mi hijo hacia adelante también y me da gusto que mi papá haya pasado a ese plano donde puedo hablar con él probablemente siempre y que me empuja adelante con mucha fuerza.
Si nos sirve de reflexión, Fernanda, cuando muere la hija de Isabel, Paula, y cuando muere mi padre más o menos al mismo tiempo, Isabel me envía una nota preciosa y me dice, la gente que de verdad queremos nunca muere porque la repetimos en nuestros gestos y en nuestros movimientos. Y eso me ha servido muchísimo en la vida. ¿Verdad? En fin, Fernanda y Alfonso, los dos, gracias por estar aquí. De verdad, se los agradecemos tanto.
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo.
Gracias por ese experimento en Spanglish y todo.
I know, the first time we do it totally in Spanglish. It was great.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Gracias a los dos. Gracias. Bye.
Okay, that felt different.
Yeah, it was mostly in Spanish, right? I think it's going to be really interesting. Let's see if people actually tune into something like that, no? You know, Paola, that's how we speak. O por lo menos yo, no? I go from English to Spanish, and most of the time with the Spanglish with a thick accent. But believe me, I learned English too late in my life just to change it. So anyway, that's who we are.
No, look, I think it says a lot about many things. One of the things that we talked about with them is the pride no, of having a whole team that is Latino, Latin American, on the camera, behind the camera. And so I think having this conversation in Spanish also says a lot. But when we were talking, Dad, it did make me think of your conversations with Isabel Allende.
Sí.
And whether or not she actually believes in La Casa de los Espíritus in this house. What did she tell you, if anything, about that?
It's interesting because I was asking her, do you talk to spirits? Do you talk to... Actually, it's more serious than that. I mean, you know, her daughter, Paula, died when my father died. And that's when we became really, really good friends. It was a very difficult moment. So it is not that she talks to spirits, but that there's a connection. She has some pictures in her house, and she actually talks to them when she needs it. And in La Casa de los Espíritus, somehow she told me it does exist, or it did exist. It was La Casa del Abuelo, her grandfather's home. But she told me that what she portrays in the book and now in the series is much, much bigger than what the house actually was. So somehow it is based in reality.
Yeah, I also, what really stuck with me too is the way that Alfonso felt, and how emotional he felt when he talked about his mother. In a similar way that Fernanda did, but there was something very very
they share so much.
remarkable.
We really appreciate that they share so much in just one interview. Also, something that I found really interesting is that how there's a paralelismo between the House of the Spirits and 100 Years of Solitude, because both families believed that it was impossible to do that in just one film. So they actually waited for this new format, just to say in a way, in which you have a series just to put together a book just like this. No, I mean it is so big. So I think the series here on Amazon in this case are giving the possibility that before did not exist, and I found that really, really interesting.
And then also, it's worth mentioning that it took them 6 years to film this series. And another thing that they mentioned to us is how Isabel Allende told them that the real way to do the House of Spirits justice, no, La Casa de los Espíritus, the way to really portray that on our screen was in Spanish. No?
And also, you know, in one of our conversations, I don't think I've known her for so many years, for decades, and she's a good friend of mine. And I don't think we give her credit for the incredible amount of work that she has done. I mean, she was a feminist before feminismo was a movement in Latin America, and how productive she is. I mean, every year she's coming out with a book and after another. While I was doing the research, then suddenly I just got in the mail her new book. Se llama La Palabra Mágica, Una Vida Escrita, in which for young writers, those who need and who want to know how you write a novel, how you write anything, this is a great lesson. So,
but Dad, because you know her, how do you think she'll react when she sees the series? What do you think?
There's always, I think
about that.
I think there's always, you know, you're asking me that. Just a couple of days I was in Mexico City, and I went to see the house where I grew up as a child. It was a very moving experience. I think there's always a disconnect between our memories and what reality is. Mm-hmm. I think she's going to like it, really, really like it. The series is just fantastic. But I wonder if that's exactly what she imagined. I'm not sure if that's exactly what she imagined.
We talked about that also with them, right? With Fernanda and Alfonso, how the idea that they had of the house, no? And I guess that's what magical realism does, was very different from what it was for them to like step into a set that is actually depicting that house. There is that disconnect.
Yeah, but let me just finish by saying that, talking about the credit, she tells me that when she's respected everywhere, no? And some people even think, I'm one among them, that she should have received the el Premio Nobel de Literatura. That's a
I
different...
have to say, there is no person in this world that is a bigger fan of Isabel Allende than Jorge Ramos.
it is
Like, man.
Okay, it is very clear. But what's so difficult for her is that, you know, this phrase in Spanish, que no hay profeta en su tierra, is that she tells me that the worst criticism she gets is when she goes back to Chile. And so that's very difficult. Anyway, whatever she does, she's just very close to my heart. And we have these very intense, confidential, private conversations. So anyway, please watch it. Watch La Casa de los Espíritus.
Watch it, and I'm curious to see what you all think. If there's something that feels familiar, about this dance that we had with language. So I can't wait to see what you guys have to say.
Listo. Gracias por vernos y escucharnos en Spanglish. Bueno,
Hasta la próxima.
Bye, Paulis. Te quiero.
Bye,
Chao.
papi.
The Moment is a production of Radio Ambulante Studios in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network. Our staff includes Daniel Alarcón, Laura Rojas Aponte, and Miguel Santiago Colón, with help from Allison Brennan, Paola Alian, Diego Corso, Natalia Ramirez, and Elsa Liliana Ulloa. Sound mixing by Andres Aspiri. Theme song by Elias Gonzalez. The CEO of Radio Ambulante Studios is Carolina Guerrero. Executive producers at iHeart are Lijo Gomez, Arlene Santana, Paulo Cabrera, Dylan Unger, and Mark Kennan also serve as producers. Our hosts are Jorge Ramos and Paola Ramos. If you like this episode, please share the word. Recommend The Moment to anyone who might enjoy unpacking these complicated times with us. If you like The Moment, pero también te gustan los podcasts en español, check out Radio Ambulante Studios. Our shows, Radio Ambulante, El Hilo, and Central are really worth a listen. I'm Lisa Cerda. Thank you for listening.